You would go ahead and be turning to Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7. We're going to be finishing up here this evening our study in the Sermon on the Mount. We're ready for chapter 7. I'm going to spend just a moment reviewing the earlier part of the sermon. We're going to go through that rather quickly. We've covered a lot of material so far in the Sermon on the Mount. Still a lot left to cover here in chapter 7, so I'll do a very quick review of the first two chapters of this sermon, as well as a quick review of the book of Matthew. Before we get started, I do want to note chapter 8 is on the back table. So our plan is to finish chapter 7 tonight. Means you need to pick up chapter 8 to get ready for Sunday morning. That is on the back table. If there is another chapter that we've gone over already that you don't have and you need, let me know. Most of them were gone. There was, I think, a few of 2 and 3. I've taken those and put them in the office for now, and if you need them, I can get them. If you need one that wasn't on the table, I can print it for you. But I'm just leaving out right now from 8 on, and then we'll take them away as we get further from those chapters, because we only have so much space to put them on that table. But chapter 8, chapter content, and the kingdom of heaven passages are all still on the back table. Our outline we're following in the book of Matthew, the theme, as we've been reminding ourselves, is that Jesus is the Messiah of Old Testament prophecy. The outline we're following is the Faith Life Study Bible outline. We've got the prelude to Jesus' ministry in 1:1 to 4:16, Jesus' ministry in Galilee 4:17 to 16:20, and then Jesus in Jerusalem 16:21 through 28:20. Our chapter content, again, once we get out of this chapter, or out of the Sermon on the Mount, we will review these again, but we haven't really added anything new because chapters 5, 6, and 7 are all covering the same thing. So chapter 1 is the genealogy and birth of the Messiah, 2 is the Messiah as a child, 3, the forerunner of the Messiah, and 4, the Messiah's temptation and early ministry. We are in the third period of the life of Christ. Again, as you go through those periods of the life of Christ, preparation, beginning of ministry, great Galilean ministry, period of retirement, close of ministry last week in the resurrection days. We are in the third of those, the great Galilean ministry. That will go into chapter 14. Chapter 4, verse 23, we've been reminding ourselves of, is one of the keys in understanding the Sermon on the Mount. As chapter 4, verse 23 says, that Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom. We bring that up because some have argued, particularly on certain things in chapter 5, that the Sermon on the Mount is just an explanation of old law, and it is not the new law. But it is Jesus giving us His law, and so we need to be aware of that in our study of the book of Matthew. So we need to be reminding ourselves of that as we're studying the book of Matthew, particularly here as we're studying in chapter 5, that it is the gospel of the kingdom that is being preached. Another thing we've been reminding ourselves of as we study here in chapters 5, 6, and 7 is Jesus' use of the phrase, I say. It occurs in 5, 18, 20, 22, 26, 28, 32, 34, 44, chapter 6, verse 2, 5, 16, 25, and 29. We have listed those for you here as well. I want to just skip through those today for time's sake to get into chapter 7. As we got into chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, again, 5, 6, and 7, we outlined together the Messiah preaches the Sermon on the Mount. That is our outline here of chapters 5, 6, and 7. Our theme, we'll add each of those chapters next time when we go to our chapter content, but chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7, the blank will all say the same thing. As we summarize the sermon when we began our study here in Matthew 5 through 7, we talked about the fact that Jesus mentions the citizens in the kingdom, the righteousness in the kingdom, and then offers the invitation at the end of this sermon. The key verse of the sermon is chapter 5, verse 20, for I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And so as he's focusing on that here in this section, he as he's focusing on righteousness in the kingdom. That is a large part of what is being discussed. The first point we talked about is chapter 5, verses 1 to 16, and that is citizens in the kingdom. And the citizens in the kingdom, he focuses on their character in 1 to 12. That's where we find those Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, merciful, pure in heart, peacemakers, and the persecuted. We then talk about the influence of a citizen in 5:13 to 16. The influence of a citizen, he says, you're the salt of the earth and the light of the world. As we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we can be a positive influence for the gospel, but also can be a negative influence. The majority of the sermon, we're still in this section right now, is 5:17 through 7:12. And that is the section we have simply titled, the righteousness in the kingdom. That is, if you're going to be part of this kingdom, there's a certain manner in which you need to live. 17 through 19 of chapter 5, he talks about how it harmonizes with the Old Testament. That what he's coming and telling them is in harmony with the Old Testament, not contradictory to the Old Testament. He then, in beginning at verse 20 and going through verse 48, says that it must exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. So, for example, not only do you not murder, but you don't have hatred and animosity. Not only do you not commit adultery, but you do not lust. You don't demand a certificate of divorce. In fact, you don't divorce except for the cause of fornication. Not only do you not make false oaths, but you just don't be dishonest. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. It is not an eye for an eye, but rather be good to your enemy and be willing to go the extra mile. It is not just love your neighbor, but love all men. And so it must exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees and how they describe it and how they would teach it. It must exceed that. Then in chapter 6, we covered chapter 6 on Sunday morning about our relationship to God. How does the righteousness in the kingdom react in that relationship? Well, you're not righteous to be seen. It's not about what others see and what others think of us, but about truly being righteous. It is not about meaningless repetition in 7 through 15. We then ended by discussing the end of that chapter about in our relationship to God and our priorities, that our righteousness in the kingdom and our relationship to God puts God first and has the right priorities. We store up treasures in heaven, not on earth. We let in only the good, not the bad. We don't have divided loyalty. We're trying to serve God and mammon, but we serve God. We do not worry, but we seek God first. We're ready now for chapter 7. That's a real quick run through of the early part of the Sermon on the Mount. We need to get to chapter 7 here this evening. Righteousness in the kingdom when it comes to our relationship to our fellow man. That's 7, 1 to 12. That's finishing up this section here on righteousness in the kingdom. There's a third point to the sermon. That is the invitation that's going to be offered. And then we will close this chapter with the people's reaction to the sermon. But as we begin in 1 to 6, we're told not to judge hypocritically. Judge not, that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet, and turn and tear you in pieces. We'll come to verse 6 in a minute. If I was going back, I'd probably put verse 6 with 7 to 12. So we're really going to focus on 1 to 5 here. If you were to walk across a random person on the street who may have not darted the door of the church building, maybe ever, but even if they had, it may not have been for a very long time, and say, what does Matthew chapter 7 and in verse 1 say? They could probably tell you, judge not, that you be not judged. And when you're talking with someone about their need to respond in obedience to the gospel, or about the fact that they are in sin, the reply that might be given is, well, you know what the Bible says, judge not, that you be not judged. We're coming back to verse 1, but let's forget verse 1 for a minute. We can't forget it because it's there, but let's forget it for just a moment and look at what everything else that is said in verses 2 through 5, set in the context. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. As you look at what is being said here in this Sermon on the Mount, in verses 2 through 5 of chapter 7, he says the judgment you use will be the judgment what? You will be judged by. The measure you use is the measure that will be used to you. Verse 3, you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but you don't consider the plank in your own eye. He then comes in verse 4 and verse 5 and says to first do what? First remove the log of the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to do what? Leave your brother alone? Not try to get him to change? No, then you'll see clearly to what? Remove the speck from his eye. Matthew chapter 7 is not about not telling people they're in sin. That's the idea people have, that we're judging them by telling them they're in sin. In fact, Matthew chapter 7 and in verse 5, in the end, you have the responsibility to tell your brother about the speck in his eye, but only after you first dealt with self. That's why, look at verse 5 again, he uses the word hypocrite. That word hypocrita, that's the Greek word translated hypocrite. We've had some lessons discussing that word before. It simply means, Bedax says, an actor, a pretender. Lauonides says it's a hypocrite, a pretender, or one who acts hypocritically. It's the word that was used in that day and time to describe those who would take part in a play. And so, if you go watch a show on TV and you see somebody playing a role, and then you watch another show and that same person is in another show and they're playing a very different role, you know why they can do that? Their job as an actor or actress is to play some kind of part. So maybe they play in one movie and they're the good guy, and then they're a bad guy in the other. In one they're really nice, and in another they're just an angry person. And they can play different roles because they put on this facade to play something other than who they are. Then you hear stories of people that maybe they play really mean characters on television, and somebody meets the actor or actress and says, you know what? They were the kindest person. You know why? Because what they're doing on that screen is they're putting on an act. You sometimes can hear the opposite. Somebody may play nice characters, but then somebody says, well, they were a real jerk to me when I came and tried to meet them. And you know why they're portrayed differently? Because they can put on an act. That's what a hypocrite is. That's why the word used is the word for an actor, a job of an actress to play a part. The one that's a hypocrite is trying to play a part. They portray themselves one way, but they're really living a different way. Jesus in Matthew 23 would use the terminology of the cup clean on the outside, but dirty on the inside. The whitewashed tomb that may look nice, but inside is filled with dead men's bones. The point that he's making here is before you worry about others and passing judgment on them, you need to take care of yourself. It is not that you do not deal with your brother or sister in sin. In fact, again, verse 5, he says you then will see clearly to deal with that. So, clearly, there is a time that has to be done. Galatians 6 and other passages would tell us that as well, dealing with those in sin. But we first must make sure that we are in the right relationship with God, and then we can see clearly to deal with others. Yes?
Kind of on the side note of what Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, we understand that is wrong and white. in sexual immorality, but always will say, what do I have to do with judging the world? And lots of we don't have this conversation with people outside the body of Christ. That's not with an action. You got to know me what I'm here if I'm professing to be a Christian. If I'm professing to be a Christian, I'm openly walking this word. You're not even getting keep coming with me. That requires a judgment of your part. Somebody doing the same sin has got to make it possible. You have to deal with it as sin, but hopefully try to bring it back to Christ. The Holy Spirit is your mind, not you. You come with that person. But my point is, in a better sense, judging aspect.
You're right, and you can't make, as you're right, you can't make that decision without that, some sense of judgment as to what needs to be done. Let's go to verse 6 now. We'll reread verse 6 and read through verse 12 again. I have 6 grouped with 1 through 5. I outlined this a while back. Going back through, I put it with 7 through 12. So just pretend that says 1 to 5 and pretend the other side says 6 to 12. Beginning at verse 6. Do not give what is holy to dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. Or what man is there among you who, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father, who is in heaven, give gifts to those who ask him? Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. I think as you go back to verse to verse 6. Don't give what's holy to the dogs, nor cast the pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their foot and turn and tear you to pieces. He then turns and talks about in verse 7 through 12. You ask and God will give to you, and he parallels that with our earthly relationships and how parents will do what is best for their children. And he says, if you then, being what? Evil. I think about the passage in Hebrews chapter 12 that talks about the chastening of the Lord, and it parallels that with the parents chastening even, and it talks about that the parents chasten as they see what is fit or what is best. Now, parents are going to make mistakes, right? Nobody's perfect, but yet we know how to care for it. If a man's son comes to him and asks for bread, he's not going to hand him a stone. If he asks for a fish, he's not going to give him a serpent. And then he comes in verse 12 and he uses a very important word. Verse 12 starts with what? Therefore. So we'll go back to our rule we go through, we talk about all the time. We get to verse 12, therefore, we've got to go back. What he just said is, he talked about not casting the pearls before the swine, but ask and God gives to you. So verse 12, whatever you want that men do to you, do you also to them. I think as you look at the broader picture of 6 to 12, I think here's the point he's making. Some may sit back and think they don't need to do anything to help other people. Some may sit back and think they may not even need to teach other people. But now verse 12, whatever you want men to do what? To you, you do to them. Don't sit back and think that you have no responsibility and that everything's okay and you can sit back. In fact, I think as you take that, where he talks about giving what's holy to the dogs and casting the pearls before the swine and asking it's given, and you take that in context with what is said before, perhaps we're dealing with two extremes. One extreme in 1 to 5 is there's the person that wants to rebuke another even when he's the one in sin, or he's in sin as well. Not the one in sin. They're both in sin, but he's in sin as well. And then I think perhaps we get to the other side. There's almost the other extreme that that's not important to deal with them, to teach them. Perhaps they view it, verse 6, the idea of they're just simply casting pearls before the swine. But he says, you ask God and God gives to you. And so you do to men what you want done to you. Do you want them to treat you well? And so you also must do. We call that the golden rule. He ends with this statement, for this is the law and the prophets. As I think about that statement in Matthew 7:22, a couple of others come to mind. One of them is Matthew 22:40 in what we call the day of controversy. That last week of the life of Christ, Tuesday, we call the day of controversy. Why? Because people are coming to Him and they are asking Him a lot of questions. And He's answering those questions in chapter 22. And so one of those was about the greatest command, and He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I think perhaps we can talk about this when we get to Matthew 22. They thought He was going to give something like, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. Do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. But Jesus, after giving those two great commandments, said this, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Now later on, in Romans chapter 13, the Apostle Paul, in discussing that, would say, owe no one anything except to love one another, verse 8 beginning of Romans 13. For he who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet. And if there's any other commandment, are all summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. So when you think about what He's saying in Matthew 7:12, and then of course when you take into account Matthew 22 as well, find a command that is not kept by either A, loving God like you should, or B, loving your neighbor like you should. And that's why, again, Jesus said about those two commandments, on these hang all the law and the prophets. He said in Matthew 7, this is the law and the prophets. And Paul in Romans 13, 8 through 10 says, this really is a summary of the law. Because if you love God like you should, again, Matthew 22, and you love your neighbor, Romans 13, Matthew 22, Matthew 7:12, as you should, that takes care of really all the other commandments. That's they all fall within the category. You love God as you should, you'll keep this one. You love man as you should, you keep this one. Or you love both as you should, you'll keep them. That really is a summary of the law. Now, we'll go ahead and get question number 7. Our questions have been more sporadic since we have 9 questions for 3 chapters. So let's go ahead and get question 7 real quick. According to the invitation of 13 to 27, who are those who entered the kingdom of heaven? Particularly 20, 21, 22, and 23. Those who do the will of the Father in heaven are those who enter the kingdom of heaven. We'll begin at verse 13. Really 3 things that are focused on in 13 to 23, and then we'll get to the story we're probably most familiar with this later on. But 13 and 14 enter by the narrow gate. 15 and 19, you'll know them by their fruits. 20 and 23 is about those entering the kingdom of heaven. Verse 13 and 14, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. In Luke 13:24, we find the parallel to that statement. And in Luke 13, Jesus is asked the question, Lord, are there few who are saved? And Jesus' answer to him really was, you strive to enter the narrow gate, for many for many, I say to you, will seek to enter and will not be able. And then he goes on to describe it. And talk more in detail there in Luke 13, but really this is the point that Jesus makes. He doesn't directly say yes or no, though he clearly alludes to the fact there are few who are saved in that text. Here he says, there are few who find it, but really your concern is not about how many get to heaven. Your concern is making sure you're one of the few that get there. And that's the point he makes in Luke's account. Yes?
Is there's a sense you enter the kingdom, you're a citizen of the kingdom, you may change from the kingdom, but that way darkness into the kingdom. So there's a sense where you're in the kingdom, even as you walk against this earth, but there's also that eternal sense where you enter in at the final shut, the void that fires of hell. You think is this not like that?
I think this is final judgment. Obviously, there's still few who become part of the kingdom at any point. But I think particularly because he talks about it leading to destruction, he's focused on the finality of it. That is, it's those that have entered the kingdom, those that have been faithful, those that do the will as we get to the end. And I think particularly when you take this in conjunction with 20 to 23, that's clearly a judgment scene in 20 and 23, that he's talking about the final judgment and whether you're going to be in heaven or hell for all of eternity. So he's telling them here, you make sure you don't go to destruction. You find the path that leads to life. Verse 15 now through 19. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you will know them. I think this really serves two purposes here in Matthew chapter 7. One is still a reminder of judgment, and that is, if one does not bear good fruit, then they are going to be cut. They're going to be cut down, and they're going to be thrown into the fire. And when you take this with what's said in 13 and 14, and what's going to be said later on, the point he's making is they're going to be destroyed and they're going to be thrown into hellfire, I think, for all of eternity. But the other part of it is to serve as a warning to them that there are false prophets and you must beware of them. Peter in 2 Peter chapter 2, beginning at verse 1, would warn his audience there in 2 Peter 2. He said, there were also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you. Well, how do you know what they are? Jesus says you know them by their fruits. You don't go to the thorn bush to get grapes. You don't go to get figs from going and gathering among the thistles. So, a good tree is going to bear good fruit. A bad tree will bear bad fruit. It's not possible to have a bad tree. If you've got a tree that's dead and rotten, you're not going to get good fruit from that. And so he says, a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor a bad tree can bear good fruit. And so if one's not bearing the fruit that's needed, I think you can take this with a number of passages. Bearing good fruit, going back to what John said in chapter 3, is bearing fruits worthy of repentance. Bearing good fruit is bearing the fruit of the Spirit, Galatians chapter 5. If we don't have that good fruit, that fruit worthy of repentance, we don't bear that fruit of the good qualities that God demands, he says we're going to be cut down and cast into fire. Verse 21 now, it should be through 23. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. There's going to be some in the judgment day. I was listening to a preacher who did a lesson not long ago entitled Surprised at Judgment, which he talked about the fact that there are going to be some people in the judgment day that are surprised by some things. Some people may be surprised in a good way about the good things they've done that maybe they themselves even forgot about, but the Lord did not forget about. But some are going to be surprised in the judgment day, Matthew 7 tells us, because they think they're going to be saved, but they're going to be lost. They're going to talk about all the good things that they've done, and yet he's going to call them, or to say that they practice lawlessness in verse 23. And so when you look at what's being said here in Matthew chapter 7 and in verses 21 to 23, Jesus is telling them here that it's not just about the things you think you've done or the things that made you feel good or the things you claim to do even in the name of the Lord. I've said this before about Colossians 3:16 and 17. Sometimes people misunderstand that and think that when it says do all in the name of the Lord, that everything they do, they're literally saying, well, I'm doing this by or in the name of the Lord. And we've talked about that statement before. It has to do with authority of. Like if the police knock on your door and say, open in the name of the law, they're saying, open by the authority given us what? By the law. So to do all in the name of the Lord is to do so by His authority, not simply throw His name at the end of it and say, I'm doing it in the name of the Lord. Well, some in the judgment day are going to think, well, listen, I've done it in the name of the Lord. I try to do things in the name of the Lord, and Jesus is going to tell them, depart from me, I never knew you, you who practice lawlessness. The Christian Standard Bible would say there, then I will announce to them, I never knew you, depart from me, you lawbreakers. That's really what lawlessness is simply just a breaking of the law. But I think when you take what is said in how the Christian Standard translates it, some are going to stand there in the judgment day thinking, we've done what we had to do to get in, and Jesus is going to tell them, you didn't keep my law. That is what you have to do to be saved. It's not about how many things we claim to do in the name of the Lord, how many mighty things we think we've done. He said it's those that do the will of my Father in heaven that are saved. As we studied a couple of weeks ago talking about our heavenly home, heaven is a prepared place for a prepared people. It's only those who obey that get to hear that we can enter into eternal rest.
Think about where it says made sacrifice. Obedience in the New Testament doesn't mean sacrifice, but that sacrifice was involved after being in correlation with what makes the New Testament law. And I'm really sure God would say, well, I can play the guitar pretty good or something like that, so I can use this to glorify God. Well, to obey is better than the sacrifice. We hold the same message, one example there. And that's what everybody would do well.
You're right. I've often thought, I've said before, I love watching sports, and the Super Bowl's over or some football game's over, baseball game, and the first thing out of everybody's mouth is, I remember this happened with the national championship a few weeks ago. I just want to start by thanking my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I'm going to let you in on a secret. Jesus doesn't care who wins a football game. Right? That's not doing things. It's about doing His will, not how many times we just simply said that on television. Not that I'm saying that if somebody's really serving God, they shouldn't try to use a platform they have, but it's not just about what we say, but what we do. Let's go now to what is the most familiar story, 24 to 27, building on the rock, the wise and foolish man. Probably a song most of us learned as kids, singing about the wise and the foolish man. Therefore, verse 24, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken to him to a wise man who builds his house on the rock. And the rains descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. When you think about the statement here, I'm going to start with the second one, because I'm going to start with the one that built on the sand. There are a number of foundations that are built upon by man that, simply put, are foundations made of sand. A foundation of sand may seem strong, at least for a time. A foundation of sand may be able to help hold up the house, at least it seems, until hardships come. Just as an example, sometimes people build on a sandy foundation by building upon simply what their parents, grandparents, or family members said to them. They seem to be strong until tested, and then the foundation falls. I'm reminded in the Old Testament where the king did all that was right as long as Jehoiada the priest instructed him. And then when Jehoiada no longer instructed him, it failed. What is popular? What is popular is a bad foundation because it's often the opposite of truth. Parents and elders and family members may be telling you the truth, and that foundation crumbles because you didn't build a true faith. But what's popular is made of sand. Again, what the elders say, what the preacher says, what makes us feel good. These are all foundations people in society, people even in the Lord's church try to build on. But that's a foundation of sand. When the storms come, it's going to fall, and great will be its fall. The solid foundation is the rock that is Christ. It is upon His Word and His Word alone that we can build a foundation. We go back to what we often call first principles, and what first principles are is simply the laying of a foundation. We need to, even as experienced Christians, go back to first principles because sometimes foundations need reinforcing. Sometimes you build a house and then you want to know what's going on. Why are the doors sagging? Why is this going on? And it's because the foundation is sagging. It's settling. It's not what it needs to be. And you've got to have somebody go in and fix that. Sometimes we need reinforcing the foundation. We build on the solid foundation, the rock that is Christ. Yes.
Of the attendees, and a lot of the opposites, some years, a lot of people good stuff. And it's almost like people that have sincere hearts into it. There's more to it, there's recruiting, review, there's explanation, all these things. So it's kind of funny you can see these things actually landing out here because, for a while they may be over and you think that's what I'm looking for. But after a while you realize this is not what it's about, and they kind of implode.
You're right, and those things will eventually, it's that foundation of sand that's going to crumble. Real quick, let's get these last two verses. Our time has gotten away from us this evening. Verse 27 and 28. And so it was when Jesus had ended these sayings that the people were astonished at his teaching, for he taught as one having authority and not as the scribes. So they were amazed because Jesus spoke with authority. The scribes didn't speak with authority, even though in a sense they sat in Moses' seat, Matthew 23, but they simply said, here's what the law says. Jesus instead used that phrase again and again, I say. He spoke with authority. The people took notice. This lesson here preached was a lesson spoken and preached with authority. Lord willing, Sunday morning, we're going to start in chapter 8. The Messiah performs miracles in chapter 8. He performs a lot of miracles, but this chapter focuses heavily on miracles, and continue our study in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 8 on Sunday morning.